Hi, and welcome to Bululu Wellness, your guide to well-being. Here, we simplify health with practical and easy-to-use tools to help you live a healthier life. Welcome everyone to Bululu Wellness, where we rebuild energy from the root, one episode at a time. Today's episode dives into a topic I absolutely love, which is genetics, and how understanding your body's unique blueprint can help you restore energy, prevent burnout, and finally make sense of why stress or fatigue might show up in the way it does. I'm joined by Dr. Greg Naccarelli, a functional medicine practitioner whose work bridges genetics, nutrition, and integrative health. And together we're going to talk about how our genes influence energy production, stress resiliency, and even mood. And really how lifestyle, nutrition, and mindset can help turn healing on at the cellular level. So welcome, Greg.
Thank you so much for the introduction. Glad to be here.
I'm so excited to have you. And for those who don't know you yet, can you share a little bit about who you are, what you do, and really also what inspired you to get into genetics and in this world?
Absolutely, yeah. So I am a naturopath doctor. I also have a PhD in genetics, and I've focused in my career on largely nutrigenomics, also other omics technologies, looking at microbiomics and metabolomics. When I was in PhD, my research, I was focusing on fatty acid metabolism, cardiovascular risk, and how genetics could be impacting that. And really how I got to this route, it's kind of been a winding road. I was always into health and fitness. And around when I was around 17 or 18, my father was diagnosed with colorectal cancer. And he wound up undergoing genetic testing. And what we found was that he was a carrier for a genetic mutation that predisposed him for colorectal cancer at a much earlier age. And his father had passed away from colorectal cancer. His brother had passed away from colorectal cancer. So I was in this world of health and fitness and supplements, and I was playing basketball, and I learned about this genetic piece, and it made me think, well, hold on a second. I didn't know that at the time I thought that things like heart disease and cancer was mainly, oh, you just need to have the right diet, the right nutrition. I didn't know that your genetics could predispose you for something, as horrible as cancer. So that shifted my focus to wanting to study genetics. So I went into a master's program focusing on molecular biology, molecular genetics. I did certain research in RNA biology. I found myself really unhealthy at the time. I was well over 200 pounds, wasn't exercising. I was having like chest pains. I remember going to the doctor. He didn't know what was going on with me, so he sent me for a CAT scan. I did a cardiac stress test, and all these things, no doctor could figure out what was wrong with me. But I went to a primary care doctor, and it was this old-timey doc. He had a gray beard, gray hair. And I walked into the office, and he gave me a couple belly taps right into my stomach. And he was like, hey, you should probably lose some weight. And it was the first time in my life someone had suggested that me being overweight was the problem. And so when that happened, I thought, okay, well, I can't control some other things that are going on in my life, but I could control my weight through diet and exercise. So then I started studying about it intensely, started studying about herbs, diet, nutrition, and exercise. I had some friends come along the ride with me, getting healthy themselves. And also, so during my career at this time, when I graduated, I started working in big pharma. I was actually working in vaccine research. So I was doing vaccine research, which is completely divorced from the integrative medicine piece. And so I found myself unhappy with the work I was doing. I felt like it wasn't truly my calling. And on the side, I was getting myself a lot healthier mentally and physically and spiritually. And there was a big layoff at my company. 1/3 of the workforce was laid off. And when that happened, I made the decision. So I learned about naturopathic school about a year prior. And I thought that this sounds incredible. I've never didn't know something like this existed. I never felt helped by conventional medicine, but I didn't know there was a route that you could be trained in an academic setting and then licensed through a program. So moved out. I'm on the East Coast. Moved out to the West Coast for 4 years to study naturopathic medicine. But what I found during that time was there was such a heavy emphasis on diet, nutrition, and lifestyle. And then I felt like the one piece that was kind of missing was the genetics piece. Now, at the time, this was in 2015, 2016, MTHFR was kind of just starting to blow up. People were talking about MTHFR and methylation and all these things. But I knew that the genome was a lot more than just one gene. So after that, I thought I know I want to focus on adding this genetics piece to integrative medicine and naturopathic medicine, but I want some more training in it. I mean, I had a club at the time. And I was graduated from Bastyr University, focusing on genetics. But yeah, so after I graduated ND school, I went to study genetics, and that's where I wound up getting my PhD. And so, yeah, I mean, now I do patient care on the side. I'm seeing patients, basically training them, or excuse me, well, I'm training practitioners how to incorporate multi-omics into clinical practice, and then using multi-omics, that being nutrigenomics and metabolomics and microbiomics, using those principles in patient care. And now, next week, I'm starting a new job as a product manager at Vibrant America, where I'll be helping them with their genetic tests and their lab test offerings.
That's amazing. That's the great story, like a personal story that you have and how you got into it and like the circles that you went through. And then you mentioned also integrative medicine. And sometimes people don't understand what integrative medicine means. What does that really mean to you, like in real life, not just in theory, but how do you apply that into your practice?
Sure. So I feel like to know integrative medicine, you have to know what the contrast of that is, and that would be allopathic medicine. Allo meaning opposite. And so essentially, if you're inflamed, take an anti-inflammatory. If you have a bacterial infection, take an antibacterial. And then of course there's homeopathy, which uses the same, so homeo same or similar. But homeopathy uses very small dilutions of things in order to elicit an effect. But integrative medicine is a combination of, so it does incorporate some principles from allopathic, or we could also call it conventional medicine. It does include, and in my, I would say naturopathic medicine is a form of integrative medicine training. I learned the traditional clinical assessments. I worked on cadavers. I learned gross anatomy. I was trained by a pharmacist in learning pharmaceuticals. But then I was also trained in botanical medicine, working with herbs, dosing herbs, combination of herbs. I did a lot of physical medicine training as well. And that was probably my weakest area. I did not know much about physical medicine. And this is exercise, movement, fascia, craniosacral work. I didn't know anything about that prior to naturopathic school. And my school I went to in Bastyr University, California, had a particularly heavy emphasis on the physical medicine. So there's the physical medicine, IV nutrients. Let's see what else. I'm probably forgetting some. Lots of biochemistry. I would say nutritional biochemistry, nutrition, dietary supplements, and then some genetics, though not nutrigenomics, which I'm applying to teach a course at nutrigenomics. So hopefully they want me to teach a course there. But I would like to start educating students, and that's why we connected, me and you, because I was teaching a course, or I taught a lecture for the American Nutrition Association on nutrigenomics and incorporating that in the clinical practice. So I would like to kind of expand the who I'm teaching that to, and I would like to start reaching the students,
Yeah.
educating them.
So in simple terms, because genes are fascinating, and all the things that you're mentioning obviously are super fascinating. But for the person that doesn't know, what can our genes tell us in regards of how do we handle stress, fatigue, and recovery, for example?
Yeah. Here's the thing I like to make people let them know about genes. First off, there's a 1% difference between each person's genome. But when you have 20,000 plus genes, 1% is still a large amount of variation. And each gene is a sequence of nucleotides. So your DNA is made of 4 different nucleotides. And so 1% you're looking at upwards of millions of different single nucleotides that are going to be different from individual to individual. So the genome, which is all the DNA in someone, is going to vary drastically between person to person. But your genome is essentially a hard copy of all the experiences of your ancestors. And it's basically the thing that persists through time. We're going to be here and then we're going to be gone, but our DNA is what is continually passed on. And our DNA will change in response to our environment. And so that's part of the reason there's differences between us. We grew up in different geolocations. We were exposed to different things, and therefore our environment selected for different genes to be continued through the continuum. And some traits were not selected. So for you to be here, congratulations, you have been selected based on evolution that you're here. So but with that said, there's small differences. And one example I like to use is, so I'm an Italian person. I was born in the United States, but my ancestors, at least some of them, came from Italy. Italy is, there's the Mediterranean diet, which is there's more fruit and vegetable consumption, dark leafy greens, and these things contain methylated folate amongst many other nutrients, but there's high doses of methylated folate. Come to the United States, there's the standard American diet, which is lacking in fruits and vegetables, and subsequently lacking in vitamins and minerals, particularly methylated folate. So my ancestors, they had adequate amounts of this methylated folate, and it's needed for so many different processes in the body, for detox, for neurotransmitter synthesis, energy production. And by me moving to an environment, if my genetics had selected for the amount of methylated folate that I would have been exposed to in Italy, and now I'm in the United States, I'm now deficient in it. I now don't have as much of it. And that is the case. People from the Mediterranean region, particularly Italians, they have a high incidence of having at least one of the MTHFR polymorphisms that make methylated folate. So MTHFR is a gene, and a polymorphism is a difference in the gene. So they have that version of the gene that makes less methylated folate. So, but it traces back to, why would that be the case? It was because my ancestors were exposed to something different. Take people in more Nordic countries. They're not consuming, or they weren't consuming as much carbohydrates as, say, people that grew up in an area where they were consuming more maize or consuming more rice. Those people are going to be better adapted to break down carbs, versus people in more Nordic countries, they were eating more animals, organ meats, and berries. So over time, the genetics select for them to deal with their environment. So when you have somebody in a different environment, their genome is going to be affecting how they deal with their environment. So using genetics in clinical practice is basically, okay, based on your unique genome, which is again, the blueprint of what your ancestors grew up with, what environment are you best suited for? What diet are you best suited for? What type of training? I know you're very big on fitness. There's a gene called the ACTN3 gene. This gene will affect people's power. So some people do more power input based on their exercising. And so these people are more likely to be sprinters, versus some people, they may more be adapted to strength, not necessarily explosiveness. So it could even, your genetics could even impact how you train, at least to be most optimally. Now, it doesn't mean you can't build power or strength based on just a single gene, but it's just examples of how your genome could impact everything: your diet, your lifestyle, how you respond to stress. It's really there's only more and more information coming out about this. That's piece number one. Piece number two is, how do you measure the output of your genome? That's where we get into the other areas. That's where we get into the metabolomics, looking at metabolites. There's something called transcriptomics, where you look at how much your genes are being expressed. So now we're getting into the realm of not just looking at your genetic risks, but then assessing how they're actually manifesting in someone's body.
It's totally so fascinating, because I had a client and he was not responding well in the diets that he was doing. He was doing all sorts of things, and it wasn't. And the funny thing, I did not know at that time anything about really the way you study genetics, but I was like, well, you are from northern countries. What about if we actually go more into more proteins instead of so much carbs and starches? And he was able to lose weight. And I was left with the doubt of, should we be eating, right, according to how our ancestors from where we come from? Like you mentioned, you are Italian, and my dad was born in Sicily. So I tend to thrive better the type of eating that happens more in that southern Mediterranean than just other types of eating. So based on that, I also discovered that I'm more an endurance type of athlete, which is pretty cool. So,
Nice.
based on that, do you as a practitioner then helps a person personalize and understand their nutrition, their supplements, and their movement, and also any other things that you encourage them while you're looking at their genetic composition?
Yeah, so first off, the starting point matters. If they're on a standard American diet and they're not moving at all, I don't even need to look at your genetics. I already know we're going to move the needle heavily if we just start eating more healthful, if we incorporate some movement. I think where these things get into more utility is when someone has been doing that and maybe they're not moving the needle as much. Maybe on a particular diet, their lipids are not looking as good as it should be, or they're not losing as much weight as they want. And they're like, well, I'm dieting and I'm exercising. This is where we could use the genetics to better tailor different dietary recommendations, different lifestyle recommendations. And like you mentioned, maybe someone does better on a higher protein diet. There's a gene called the FTO gene. It stands for fat mass and obesity associated gene. And there's certain risk variants in that gene where people do much better and will lose more weight on a higher protein diet. There's another gene called TCF7L2. This one, if you look it up, there's a hunter-gatherer variant in there. And basically, people that eat more fiber and more carbs are with certain risk variants in that gene are more likely to have higher blood sugar than if you didn't have some of the risk variants. So there's the farmer variant and a hunter-gatherer variant. So, one person be like, I'm eating a ton of fiber. I thought my blood sugar would be lowered. It's like, actually, based on your genetics, you shouldn't. Actually, you're a better responder to just straight carbs. So there's just these nuances in some of these genes where, it will change the diet that you recommend, and it could change the exercise recommendations that you recommend, and even supplementally, like there's lots of genes that affect minerals. There's certain risk variants in genes that transport magnesium. Well, genes that code for transporters that transport magnesium. So someone's more likely to be magnesium deficient, or zinc, which you'll see risk variants in that associated with diabetes. Because zinc is needed for insulin signaling. So not just like the macronutrients, but also the micronutrients. Detox pathways, that's one of my favorite areas to look at. Is there's so many genes that make enzymes and proteins that help us detox things from our environment. And again, this goes back to if you're not doing anything, just helping support detox pathways is a good start. But then we could get more nuanced. What specific enzymes are you not expressing that you cannot detox certain things properly? Maybe you're not good at detoxing pesticides. Maybe you're not good at detoxing heavy metals. Maybe you're more susceptible to mycotoxins. We can figure this out based on your genome. And so it allows those nuances for those individual things.
So for that person, we're in this epidemic of chronic stress and fatigue. And this person, let's say, that has done, like good dieting, they're exercising, but still their bodies, it's almost like they are never really catching up, even though they're taking the supplementation, they're doing all the things. Would the next step be kind of go into maybe genetic testing and work with somebody like you? And maybe is there any pathways that you see that is more like energy production for that person? Can you talk to me through that? Like if somebody's like super fatigued or chronic stress and it seems like their body's not really catching up.
Yeah. So the first thing that comes to mind is if somebody is dieting and they're exercising and it's still not working for them, the next thing I think of is hormones. So where that person is in their life cycle, whether they're perimenopausal female, or maybe they're a guy who's just had low testosterone their whole life. Hormones, if those are off now, and you could also have genetic reasons for that. Some people they're genetically predisposed to making more aromatase. So a man will have less testosterone and higher estrogen. Some women, their estrogen receptor, there's risk variants in the estrogen receptor gene, so their estrogen is not activating the estrogen receptor properly. So, there is genetic nuances in that. But I would say the first thing I would do before I would do nutrigenetics is a very comprehensive lab panel. Like, let's look at it all. Let's look at the red blood cells, look at the kidneys, the liver, vitamin D, B vitamins, cardiovascular risk markers, inflammation, thyroid. That's another big one, but that's still within the realm of hormones. So I would look at all of that stuff first, then I would move to nutrigenetics. What I found though is for people that find me, they found me because they started exploring nutrigenetics. And their idea is all the information we need is in the nutrigenetics. But I let them know your genetics is an at-birth event. When you were born, or I should say when you were conceived, you got one copy of each gene, one from your mom, one from your dad, and like that's your gene sequence. What can change is how the genes are either turned on or turned off, and that's where your environment will be impacting it. What you're eating, how you're sleeping, your movement, that's going to change the gene expression. And there's ways we could figure out, okay, what genes are actually a problem versus what genes aren't. Part of it is doing a really good clinical workup, like asking the right questions for the person. But another part of that is labs. And that's where the regular labs come into play. And then we get to the more fun stuff. Like we talked about methylation. Methylation is part of this pathway called 1-carbon metabolism. It's also connected to the folate cycle and transsulfuration pathway, which makes glutathione. But we could look at all these metabolites. There's a bunch of metabolites there that we could get down to the nitty gritty to figure out, okay, how specifically is your methylation cycle functioning? And some people do want to explore that information just to be a little, because if you know exactly what metabolites are either high or low in conjunction with the genetic variants, you know where to intervene. So for example, there's a metabolite called S-adenosylmethionine, SAM, or sometimes called SAMe. And there's so many studies that have been done for that for cognitive function, joint health. There was a study recently talking about how creatine, some of the benefits of creatine are because it's such a powerful methyl donor, it allows our body to use more SAMe for other things rather than using methyl donors to make SAMe. And but we could measure it. We could measure SAMe, and then in some circumstances, if I see someone that has methylation dysfunction and their SAMe is low, we have an argument to supplement with it. So you know, there's layers, but I would prefer not to jump to nutrigenomics. I think you're kind of jumping the gun, but unfortunately, it's just you know, most people I'm seeing nowadays, they see me because they've done the genetics and they want me to interpret it.
So when would be an appropriate time for a person to enter into the nutrigenomics arena? When is that time, right? Like you mentioned that there's an order, like a person comes in, you do a full assessment, you change certain things. So when is in layers and steps, like when would be that time that you're like, you know what, let's look into genes at this point?
Yeah. Now, first off, I love data. So I would like them to give me everything because I would rather more information than less information, because the more information I know about the person, better I could help them. But let's say there's no information. Them seeing me, and again, if they're not moving, if their diet is not good, if they're still eating fast food and ultra processed food, and they haven't really tried diets in the past, or it hasn't worked for them, or they're not moving, or they're let alone exercising, they're barely getting walking in, I don't care about nutrigenetics at that point. I know I'm going to move the needle drastically by just incorporating healthier diet, lifestyle, and even some supplement recommendations. If we've done that and it's not working for whatever reason, and honestly, I feel like in integrative medicine, we're kind of like the second layer of people seeing us. It's not like they are, oh, I'm sick now, sudden, I'm going to go see an integrative medicine doctor. It's like, I'm sick, and then I saw this doctor, this one, and this one said this, and this one told me not to do this, blah, blah, blah. So they've seen a million practitioners, they've tried a million different things, then they see me. So usually the people I'm seeing, they've tried a bunch of things, and it has not really been working for them. And so then they want the more nuanced approach to figuring out what's going on with their health. And I would say then when we get to that area, then nutrigenetics is valuable, because now we could get more discrete in what interventions we should target rather than just taking a generalized approach.
Do you have an example of somebody that you've seen that when they finally balance that biology part, like the genetics part, what kind of shifts did you notice in this person? Can you give us a client example?
Yeah, I just had someone earlier today, we were talking about histamine. And so there are genetic variants. So histamine is something, it's released, people talking about seasonal allergies. It's not just these things in the environment that you could breathe in. Certain food proteins can elicit a histamine response. And, we'd like to think of like sneezing and a red face and watering eyes, but also it could result in a lot of gastrointestinal issues. Particular genetic variants in there that someone can have that could alter how sensitive you how sensitive so there's these cells called mast cells. They release histamine in response to some trigger. Some people are more sensitive to release histamine based on some exposure. There's histamine receptors. Some people are more likely to have activation of the histamine receptor upon histamine binding. And then there's the things that break histamine down. There's a gene called HNMT. There's risk variants in this gene where people have been found to be more sensitive to food dyes and food allergens and preservatives. And I'm definitely one of those people. But this gene product will use a methyl group to inactivate histamine. So this is where histamine ties in with methylation. But she had some risk variants there. She also had a risk variant in a gene called diamine oxidase, DAO. And this is a enzyme that helps break down histamine. And so she had chronic histamine issues, but she had a big genetic predisposition towards not being able to break down histamine. So we talked about there's something called a low histamine diet. There are certain foods that are histamine forming. We had her eliminate those from her diet. There are natural agents that could help stabilize the mast cells. So vitamin C, big antihistamine agent. Quercetin, big antihistamine agent. There's enzymes that help break down histamine, such as bromelain. And then that other enzyme I mentioned, diamine oxidase, you can supplement with it. And so we got her started on that, and that drastically cut down her histamine reactions. And some of those, it's going to vary how much someone should take. I mean, here's the thing with genetics, because this is a chronic ongoing thing, like for her, I'm suggesting her to stay on the diamine oxidase long term just because her body just makes less of it than someone else. And so sometimes you find these nuances and it's like, I need more of this compared to another person. Same thing with her methylation was a little bit lower, so having her stay on the methylation support. But yeah, that's a recent one. And I
That's
think histamine is a big one because there's a lot of immune dysfunction in people's environments, and a lot of immune dysfunction is driven by histamine, and mast cell activation syndrome and disorder is a big one nowadays.
Yeah, I've been hearing more and more. I do believe that I do have a histamine issue too, but that I'll leave it for you later. So
Okay.
if somebody wanted to take one more small step right now, one small action to support their genes or their energy, what would it be? Like, so for example, is there's anything nutritional focus on, or what do you think it should be?
Sure. Here's the thing that upsets me about uh and I want to take a step back because there is a lot of people focusing on individual genes. This gene is important, this gene. Your genome as a whole is very precious, and there's things called genotoxins that can damage your genome. And they're the same toxins we've heard of. Different heavy metals can damage our genome. Mycotoxins can damage our genome. PFAS and PFOS, those are now ubiquitous in our environment. We're seeing how it's an epidemic and they're quote unquote forever chemicals. They're very difficult for our body to get rid of. So I would say if somebody wants to have optimal genome health, stop damaging your genome. I forgot to mention alcohol is another one, but any environmental pollutant or thing leading to oxidative stress in your body is going to be damaging your genome. So always start with the basics. Clean air. Make sure your air in your household is pure. Use an air purifier. Use an activated carbon filter. Get out in nature on occasion. Breathe some fresh air. Clean water. Make sure the water that you're drinking is pure. Don't drink out of plastic bottles. I prefer a whole house filter in addition to a reverse osmosis filter, but make sure your water is filtered. And then the food, make sure you're eating organic food. Try to, even how you cook your food, blackening your food, highly oxidizing your food is not good for your genome, let alone your body. So, even be mindful of eating clean, but also how you prepare your food. So clean air, clean food, clean water, and then good relationships as well. Stress leads to oxidative stress. When we look at epigenetic pathways associated with aging, like 75% of them are all dealing with some level of stress. So having good relationships and being centered is so important for just your stress and your genome health. And this ties into the longevity thing. It will promote longevity by managing your stress. So I would say those four areas are something I would highly suggest people pay a lot of attention to.
That's awesome. And it sounds doable, but sometimes is a little bit, people sometimes will say, well, the air purifier costs money and the water. And so even though it sounds simple, maybe starting little baby steps, one at a time.
Yeah, I would say maybe like 10 to 15 years ago, there was a big difference in like the affordability. If you wanted to go organic versus not, you'd have to go to like a niche grocery store and it was like always double the price. I'm on the East Coast. I have stores near me called Wegmans. I don't know if they're down there where you're at in Georgia. You're in Georgia, right?
Yes.
But to get organic is like, I don't know, 20, 30 cents more than most other things. So it's like, it's so easy to get organic now. Part of it is an effort thing too. It takes effort to cook your own food at home versus going out and eating. So for most things, it is doable. And I would start with food is probably the easiest one. And then I don't know, we got Black Friday coming up. Get your air purifiers on a sale. That's what I usually do. Right, get some good sales, lock them in. Just start saving up. You got a month.
You sound like a great salesperson.
Yeah.
To close, what has this work taught you personally about healing the body, about resiliency, about longevity?
So I'm going to lean on my naturopath mind and say that the body has the ability to heal itself. You need to just get out of the way. And usually the people know what they need to do. It's just difficult doing it. It's difficult to give up a bad habit. It's difficult to pick up a good habit. And so get out of the way of your body trying to heal itself, and it will do some amazing things. All you have to do is support it. Support it with good food, sometimes some supplements, good people, good energy, and your body will absolutely heal itself.
Thank you so much for having this conversation with me. I would love to let people know how they can find you, how they can connect with you, and more about your work or anything that you want to share with us.
Sure. So I have an Instagram page. So if you want to follow me there, it's Dr. Naccarelli or at Dr. Naccarelli. So I'm sure I'll put it in the show notes. And I do have a website. It's just basically like a bio page. But I am part of an organization, a precision medicine organization, and I'm in the process of making a nutrigenomics course. So if you are a practitioner, you will have access with that. And if you're interested in working with me, if you just reach out to me through my website, I am seeing some clients. So if you're interested in working with me, you can reach out to me through there.
Awesome. Yeah, I will leave everything in the show notes and the summary. And thank you so much, Greg, for being here. I truly appreciate you sharing your extensive knowledge. I'm pretty sure that I can talk to you for hours about this. So I appreciate you spending the time with me and hope to chat with you soon.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Meli. Appreciate it.
If you enjoy what you hear, subscribe and share it with someone who might need it. The more people join us, the closer we get to building a wellness community for everyone. Thank you for being here. Now let's navigate this bululu together. This podcast is not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any condition or disease. If you need help, please seek professional care.